Good afternoon and welcome to the NetSuite Asia Pacific webinar series. My name is Bianca Edgar. I'm the Marketing Manager at NetSuite. Today we are pleased to introduce Michael Barnes, Vice President and Research Director, Forrester Research. Michael has 20 years of IT experience and joined Forrester through its acquisition of Singapore-based Springboard Research. He primarily focuses on disruptive trends in IT enterprise, including cloud computing, big data, analytics, and mobility in the enterprise. Today, Michael will discuss software as a service adoption trends over the next 18 to 24 months and their impact on your organization in the Asia Pacific region. Learn why IT must take a more proactive and supportive role in helping the business manage software as a service to help deliver positive business value. Before I hand over to Michael, I will just take a moment of your time to introduce NetSuite to you. Founded in 1998, NetSuite has experienced substantial growth over the past 16 years with revenues of $414.5 million, which is a 34% growth over the prior year. We have offices in 10 countries and have been in Australia for over 7 years. Our business management solution runs mission-critical applications in the cloud across finance, CRM, and e-commerce for over 20,000 companies and subsidiaries across the world. Since its inception in 1998, NetSuite has established itself as the leading provider of enterprise-class cloud financials ERP suites for divisions of large enterprises and mid-sized organizations. NetSuite continues its success in delivering the best cloud ERP financial suites to businesses around the world, enabling them to lower IT costs significantly while increasing productivity as global adoption of the cloud is accelerating. I will now pass you over to Michael Barnes. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks very much, Bianca, and welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. It's a cold, rainy day here in Sydney, but so it's definitely a pleasure to spend some time with you. And thanks to NetSuite for inviting me to present to you. So what I'm going to do in the time we had is cover a couple of key topics, but really the general theme is the changing role of IT in terms of helping the business really fuel growth. The truth is there's been a pretty fundamental shift in the role of IT, particularly in terms of sourcing business capabilities, business services, applications. It's gone from really being viewed as an internally focused business support service towards really being a primary source of business value, and in fact an enabler, an accelerator of business growth and differentiation. So what I want to do is, with that being the context, talk a bit about what's happening in the ERP space in particular, with a focus on Asia Pacific. I've been in the region now for about 14 years, so I'm really going to focus on the trends we're seeing across the region, and in particular, the trends towards software as a service as an approach to sourcing ERP solutions in order to drive business value. So very simply, just to start with the agenda, I want to start off by talking about the age of the customer. I want to explain very clearly what that means. Then I will talk a bit about the implications for IT and really the fundamental requirement, which is the need for IT to more effectively partner and engage with the business in order to enable change, leveraging technology. And the final area of focus is around SaaS ERP specifically, in particular some of the best practices for selecting a solution, for sourcing a solution, for managing that solution as part of the overall strategic portfolio of technology assets within the organization. So let me start with the age of the customer, because I'm well aware that the phrase, well, two things. One, it can come across as analyst or consulting speak, when in fact it's fundamental to all of our organizations and the way we leverage technology and systems to interact with our customers. So that's what I want to focus on. In order to do that, let me kind of put it into a context. The term itself is not new. We've been talking about being customer-centric, customer-focused for really as long as most of us have been in business. In fact, more than 20 years ago, someone wrote a book around the age of the customer. But things have changed. And in fact, Forrester believes very strongly that the real age of the customer is just beginning. And to understand that and to kind of prove that pretty strong statement, what I would urge you to do is think about the evolution of markets and where we've come from. In the early days, it was quite simple. If you as an organization owned the plant, owned the factory, you were in a position to potentially win the market. You were in a position to potentially control, certainly influence the market, possibly even define the market, depending on the types of goods, services, products that you actually manufactured. As markets grow, as the continued quest for growth among organizations continues, manufacturing isn't enough. Manufacturing excellence isn't enough. Increasingly, it's not just how good you are at creating your products, at building your products. It's about how you get them to market. So we move into really the age of transportation, of logistics, and distribution as the core and primary value proposition. So the level at which we compete shifts. It shifts from a core competency around production towards a core competency around distribution. And then if we move forward a little further, we move into what we would call the age of information, which is really just a recognition that as of about the early 90s onwards, with the widespread adoption of PCs and distributed computing, wasn't good enough to be excellent in manufacturing. It wasn't even good enough to be excellent at distribution. Increasingly, leading companies are those that are able to leverage the information flowing through their networks, through their supply chain, in order to optimize their operations and better target their customers, however they find them. Now we're into a new era, and there are some fundamental changes to it that I'll talk about. And the bottom line, when we talk about the age of the customer, was this: being good at what you do, continuing to incrementally improve core operations and operational efficiency within your organizations. That's essential, but it's nowhere near enough in order to compete in the market that we are now well into. And let me touch on why that is. First off, some things we're seeing that, frankly, we've always seen. Regulations will continue to change in different markets. In some markets, like parts of ASEAN, there's free trade agreements coming into effect. We'll change regulations. Certainly, as we grow as companies and look to expand across the region or even across the globe, we come face to face with new regulations. There's always been, always will be new competitors. And clearly there's price pressure, margin pressures that we've always dealt with. So there's nothing new there. Again, that comes to the core of what we as business and technology professionals do, which is incrementally improve what we're doing, seek efficiency, seek economies of scale. But now the other side of the equation, what is new is this notion of empowered customers. And let's just take a moment to explain what we're talking about here. With the age of the customer, we are talking about a fundamental shift in the balance of power. In all of the previous eras that we worked in from a business standpoint, whether it was the age of manufacturing, the age of distribution, the age of information, they were supplier-controlled, supplier-defined markets. The suppliers, the sellers, if you will, generally had control. The notion of, quote-unquote, owning your customers was actually a valid objective for a lot of companies, and that was the focus. Well, the age of the customer and why Forrester believes it's so critical and so important as an implication and as a change agent and disruptor for companies of all sizes across all markets is that that's no longer the case. We as suppliers, we as businesses no longer have the center of power. That has shifted to our customers, whether they're consumers or other businesses. They are now empowered. And by empowered, I mean they are tech-enabled. They are connected. They now expect access and have access and will continue to get increasing access to information about us, about our products, to information about our markets, to information about competitive products and competitors to us. And they increasingly have the ability to seek out those competitive capabilities, products, or services. So what does that mean? Well, it means we're faced with decreasing loyalty. We're faced with disruptive technology as the capabilities that our customers have continue to change and increase. We're faced with rising expectations among our customers, which is driving shortened product life cycles, shortened service life cycles. And we absolutely, particularly across growth markets in Asia, should expect even more pervasive mobility. The ways in which our customers, again, whoever they are, however you define them, the ways in which they interact with us as businesses will continue to change. So to put it a different way, the idea that you could focus on incremental improvements and identify and maintain a stable competitive advantage through some core competencies, it's still essential, but it's not nearly enough. Competitive differentiation and competitive advantage comes through how well you are able to adapt to ongoing and continuous changes. In other words, how agile you are able to be. So let's put that in the context of the ERP market and how we've seen it evolve over time. And really our view is that the ERP market is evolving along three key dimensions. On the left, there's certainly the industry segment and understanding kind of how that segment evolves and what it means for the types of solutions that you source and where you source them from. You certainly have your core kind of ERP functions in the middle, things like finance and accounting, but these industry-specific functionality may come from your core provider. They may come from a partner. So one of the first questions you need to ask when you're looking to source ERP solutions from whatever source and whatever provisioning option you choose is how extensible they are, in case you do, in fact, need to leverage some industry-specific capabilities from a partner. And then on the bottom, there's the issue of globalization, or the opportunity or challenge of globalization. It's understanding and accounting for and supporting country and regional requirements, dealing with language translation issues, dealing with currency issues where necessary, as well as, of course, the underlying and kind of fundamental need to be able to scale, to manage growth and manage potentially global deployments. And then the third area, beyond industry dynamics and dimensions, beyond globalization, is the cloud. And the simple reality that there is a absolutely viable alternative to the traditional on-premise approach to deploying enterprise applications, deploying ERP systems. And make no mistake, ERP vendors are absolutely being forced and have been forced to shift their own competencies and capabilities to the cloud in order to compete with some of the native SaaS players. And the key requirement for that, or certainly one of the keys, is the efficiency and effectiveness of SaaS-based deployment. You know, to be a SaaS provider and to really deliver the benefits of software as a service and cloud-based solutions to an organization, a provider must be multi-tenanted. They must be able to provide both frequent and, more important, seamless updates to their customers. And they need to ensure that the solutions they provide are relatively easy to configure. That means no code-level customization, because code-level customizations will then break the ability to enable frequent and, more importantly, seamless updates. So we'll talk about that a little more in the next section, but I really wanted to set the scene on how we see the ERP marketing evolving. Now, what about the perceptions of SaaS buyers, or the perception of organizations in terms of how they view software as a service? Well, one of the things that we do at Forrester, one of our core value propositions, is the amount of folks that we speak to. We speak to thousands of senior IT and business decision makers every year across the globe, including thousands in Asia Pacific. And what I'm sharing here is an example. This is from one of our global studies focused very much on software and software deployment. And it was a very simple question that we asked. How important were the benefits in your firm's decision to use software as a service specifically? Clearly, cost is still important. Cost will always be important, including flexible mechanisms and ways to pay for cost and to potentially spread out the cost of a solution. But if you look at the top 5 reasons, they all are different angles on a common theme, and that common theme is agility and speed. From a business standpoint, agility is clearly, let me say it differently, increasingly being viewed as the foundation for competitive advantage. And that's going to continue, and I think it's going to become even more well ingrained from a business standpoint. Frankly, it's already there. Where we've been lagging is from a technology standpoint. The questions that we need to ask increasingly in this age of the customer is really how, where, and I suppose even why we should look to disrupt some of our preconceived notions that we have around enterprise software as it relates to things like ownership costs, process flexibility, usability, and speed of deployment in particular. So ask yourself in general, how are you paying for your core systems? Is there a better way potentially to fund those systems? How quickly can you set them up and deploy to the people who are demanding those systems, and how easy is it for those folks to actually use them and leverage them and drive actually business value through those? So that was the setup really in section 1, and my objective there, as I said, was very much to, I suppose, welcome you to the age of the customer, more importantly, explain the implications for the age of the customer, the implications for the basic reality that our customers are empowered, whether consumers or other businesses. They are empowered, they are tech-enabled, they are connected, hence their expectations are changing. Now, what's interesting is, again, as I said earlier, business gets this. Business intuitively understands that their markets are changing, that the expectations of their customers are changing. And we see this in technology spending. And again, harking back to the same study, this is a broader slice of that data. So this is a budgets and priorities survey that we run annually. And I wanted to show you some results over the past 3+ years because we asked the same question in 2010, in 2012, and then at the very end of 2013. And it's fascinating to look at the shift in technology purchase decisions. So on the left, what you're seeing here is the split in who within the organization is actually influencing or making technology purchase decisions. And if you look at that blue bar, what it's showing very clearly is that the percent of IT purchases being made directly by the IT organization is going down. It's steadily going down. We expect it to continue to go down from 74% in 2010 to 58% in 2012 to 51% now. But that's only half the story. If we drill down into those percentages, so into that 74, 58, and 51% to get a better feel for the breakdown in influence of technology purchases, even where they are being directed and controlled by IT, we see a similar story. Even within the IT purchases, we see the influence of the business increasing pretty dramatically from right around 50% of purchases having significant business input in 2010 to above 70%, 73% in 2013. So, this begs the question, and the follow-on question we asked is very simple. Why? Why is the business getting more involved? And the answer is as simplistic as it could possibly be. Bottom line, technology purchases, technology investments are viewed as simply too important for the business not to be involved. This notion of IT as a support function, as IT as a source of ongoing operations, that, again, it's critical, and IT continues to perform that role, but they need to perform much more. IT is increasingly being viewed technology is increasingly being viewed, and technology investments are increasingly being viewed as a source of business growth. And that is the key reason that the business is more involved in technology decisions and will be. So again, let's go back to the ERP market and talk a bit about the footprint for traditional ERP systems and then where it's changing. So this chart is very much to illustrate really the core value proposition for ERP systems. This is generally well understood areas. The first being order to cash, which is, put simply, that's your revenue stream as an organization, and you see the areas that it cuts across. Then there's procure to pay, which very simply is really your expenditure stream, and that's obviously critical to core operations and core operational efficiencies within your organization. And then, of course, there's record to report, which is your core accounting systems. Now, we could add some other capabilities, things like HR for the employee life cycle and employee management, CRM for sales cycle, for Salesforce automation. They're clearly critical, and I mentioned partners play a role potentially as well in some of those industry solutions, so need to be considered. But that's only half the equation. These technology areas, these capabilities, these processes, these are all fundamentally part of how we as organizations operate, how we automate processes, and indeed how we optimize those processes once they're well defined. But there's a whole other area of focus that we need to think about when we consider the fact that our customers are empowered. We need to think not only about these traditional systems of record, which core ERP, the functionality I mentioned, generally are. They're systems of record that host our core business processes. They're very well designed and optimized for data input. They're very well designed for mapping well predicted, well understood, and planned for usage by a well-defined user base. You just think about the process for implementing a traditional ERP system. We have the time, the ability to define requirements, to scope out requirements, to map out usage scenarios and usage flows and workflows and process flows, and create or modify or configure a system to reflect those processes. But now think about the other half of the equation, which in the age of the customer means how do we touch those customers, those constituents, including consumers, including businesses, if that's the focus, including our partners, including our employees. How do we engage with them? And how do we ensure that they're getting what they need? Because the fundamental reality and starting point for the age of the customer and for empowered customers is this notion that they now expect, and I would argue they can realistically expect, to have access to any information, any service, any product via whatever device they happen to be using in context in their moment of need. So the question is how we develop, deliver, source, and continually modify systems that are context-rich or provide the basis for context-rich offerings and services to these constituents, however we're defining them, in their moment of need. And this, we argue, is really very core to the increasing interest we're seeing around SaaS-based solutions and cloud-based solutions, including in the ERP space, because many of the processes, many of the services, many of the capabilities that we look to extend to our key customers or partners or employees through systems of engagement directly link or must directly link back to our core ERP systems, to our core systems of record. So how can we ensure there's adequate agility across those systems and between those systems? So again, to come back to some of the data I want to share with you, this is an indication of the overall perceived importance of cloud and as a service offerings in general. So we didn't limit this too narrowly to just software as a service, but really cloud-based services that include software as a service as well. And you can see the results there by region. So in markets, it's quite similar between Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and Singapore in terms of the percent of organizations, roughly around 50%, that actually view this strategy as either critical or a high priority. Now, it's just from a visual standpoint, I didn't include the percentage of folks that responded either low priority or not on their agenda, or the don't know responses. But you can see from the numbers, it's a small minority relative to the percent of organizations that are viewing cloud-based solutions as a priority. But this is where things get interesting, because this is very much the view from IT's perspective. The problem is, and part of the challenge is, IT, in terms of their perception of cloud and software as a service in particular, and in terms of their knowledge of what's actually being used within organizations, doesn't yet match business reality or the business expectations. And I'll show you this slide as an example. Now, the categories don't cleanly match to ERP in broad terms, but if you were to lump the bottom areas, industry-specific solutions and horizontal solutions, you could certainly include ERP within that. And you see some of the other areas, so ERP is not alone. What's interesting about the slide, the dark blue number on top, that represents the percent of business decision makers that are either currently using or planning to use these types of cloud-based solutions. In lighter blue underneath that, you see the same response from IT. So in every single cloud category, what we're seeing is a continuing disconnect in terms of perceptions of cloud usage. In other words, the business is using more cloud-based services than IT is aware of. This is a problem, and this is really the foundation for this last section that I wanted to touch on, is how we can overcome this problem. And it starts by understanding why we have this problem. From my viewpoint, the challenge, it's somewhat ironic in that the fundamental benefits of cloud-based services, the fundamental benefits of software as a service are what I said. It's the ability to have multi-tenanted solutions, to have shared resources, primarily because that allows the SaaS vendor to be able to efficiently, effectively, and often transparently upgrade those systems. The chances of a break in the upgrade path, the chances of a solution becoming out of date and needing significant patches for security, that disappears in the SaaS-based world. But ironically, those are also some of the key benefits, or let's say the characteristics of cloud that worry IT. This loss of control. This notion that somehow if the software isn't deployed on-premise behind my firewall and within my quote-unquote control, that somehow there's an introduction of increased risk. The reason I find this ironic is that that's actually the opposite of reality. The reality is that IT, in order to remain a credible source of business agility, of business innovation, and to provide a basis to fuel business growth, IT needs to think about ways to enable a far more continuous and seamless and efficient strategy for improving applications. The traditional approach to on-premise deployment simply doesn't work in all instances. The more pressure there is to adapt systems, the more pressure there is to extend, the more pressure there is to continuously update, configure, or otherwise tweak capabilities. The more pressing those needs are, the more traditional approaches to software deployment and maintenance fall down. And again, we see this. So on this chart, if you think about it on the right, continuous application improvement, what are we actually talking about? Well, there's a few things to keep in mind. One is this notion of being able to empower business people, business users, to configure the capabilities properly based on their needs. They are the ones that are closest to the customer. They will always be the ones who are closest to the customer. So the challenge is how, in a controlled environment, we are able to give them enhanced capability, to empower them so that they can better serve empowered customers. And then if you look at 2, it's about enhancements. As I mentioned, it's about the ability to extend these applications, but to do it in a way that is manageable, to configure capabilities without making changes or modifications to the underlying code itself, which will cause significant issues in the next upgrade cycle and significant issues with maintenance. And that's directly related to point 3 in the bottom left, which is how effective and how effectively we can manage patches and manage bug fixes and ensure that they're up to speed. I would argue strongly the best way to do that is to leave it up to the vendor. In the case of software as a service, a true software as a service solution, that is done automatically. That is transparent from the user or the customer perspective. And then finally, in the bottom right, how you pay for this. How do you plan and budget for upgrades or for initial deployments? There needs to be some flexibility there, particularly for small and mid-sized organizations, and particularly in growth markets where organizations may need significant help in terms of ramping up their capabilities around both traditional systems of record and systems of engagement, but lack the capital for significant upfront expenditure on not only the software licenses, but the hardware and infrastructure required to deploy a traditional on-premise software solution. So is there an alternative, a way to better manage that financing as you go? And that's clearly the approach with software as a service. So as part of my research, I've actually written quite a bit over the past 12, 18 months around cloud adoption trends. And one of the reports I wrote about halfway through last year was around software as a service specifically. And the focus was very much on how to, as IT professionals, how to be more engaged in the process, how to start becoming a positive voice and influencer of SaaS-related purchases, which is a big shift from where many organizations have been over the past few years, where the IT view was resistance. It was very much a knee-jerk reaction that software as a service, cloud-based services are bad. There's a security risk to them. There's other potential performance risks that made them, frankly, too risky for the organization to embrace. Well, the problem with that position is that it does not reflect reality. Business will source the capabilities they need to engage customers. If internal IT is unable to deliver those capabilities in a timely fashion, then the business will source those capabilities elsewhere. That's the simple reality, and there's no way around it. So instead of dealing with SaaS and cloud in general from a position of denial, starting point really for becoming a more positive influence and steering the investments and the usage in ways that better serve the organization. It starts by ensuring a basic agreement on what's already in use, getting agreement and understanding about what is being used by the organization. And this is non-trivial in larger companies or companies that are spread across multiple geographies within Asia or beyond, is understanding what's there and getting a reasonable sense of the portfolio and catalog of cloud-based services, including SaaS, that's already being used. And the way to do that is the second point. Start by rethinking the role of IT. The role of IT, in our view, is not, and you know what, to a large extent never was, about managing technology. The role of IT is really to provision services, to provision IT-enabled capabilities to the business. And frankly, if you think about IT's role in that context as more than just managing infrastructure, but as the source of capabilities that are of the source of IT-enabled capabilities, then the type of provisioning that you choose, the type of deployment, whether it's traditional on-premise, whether it's some type of virtual private cloud deployment, or whether it's a pure public cloud shared multi-tenant solution via software as a service, that's a deployment option. That's a decision you make based on the particular capabilities or requirements or needs of the group that's pushing for those capabilities, or that demands or that requires those capabilities. So there's no necessarily universal right answer. We're not seeing organizations necessarily adopt a pure cloud-based approach, just in the same way that we believe it's frankly untenable and a bad idea for companies to attempt to continue to pursue a pure on-premise approach to application deployment and provisioning. The world is very much hybrid, and that extends certainly to ERP systems. And this has been a change. This notion that core ERP systems can in fact be sourced as software as a service, and in fact may be far more beneficial to use an organization in that mode. And the final point, and this is pretty critical, is proactively engage business buyers to ensure that the SaaS solutions that they're seeking fit within existing systems. There's an irony here, right? The more successful a SaaS solution is, particularly one that's sourced outside of IT, the more the business folks who sourced it or may have originally sourced it are going to demand IT's involvement, because the more they're using that solution, the more likely they're going to expect that it can integrate with some of the more traditional systems where maybe there's customer data or supply chain data or something that was traditionally managed internally, but now because of the widespread adoption and usage of a particular SaaS solution, they want access to those core capabilities from that SaaS solution. Well, that's significantly easier if IT was involved from the beginning, if IT had a significant role and a positive, proactive role in evaluating the particular SaaS solution, because that's one of the key criteria that an IT organization can provide that the business, frankly, when they're looking at solutions, may not think of, which is that fit within again, what I said, that hybrid scenario where the expectation is there will be large number of solutions, some of which will remain on-premise, some of them will be cloud-based, and how to make those work together and to drive agility is a key consideration for all of us as organizations. So let me leave you with some key takeaways before we turn it over to a Q&A. First one, again, from a technology standpoint, as IT professionals, we need to accept the fact, if we haven't already, that SaaS solutions are part of the strategic IT portfolio. Our role as technologists is to provision IT-enabled capabilities to the business. That's what we do. How we do that is up to us. That's part of the discussion that we have, and SaaS needs to be considered as a potential option. It may not be your chosen option in all instances, in all scenarios, in all geographies, for reasons we can talk about, but it needs to be considered. The role of IT and the value I mentioned earlier, one of the best practices is to be quite proactive in working with the business. That means it's not about saying no. It's not about implementing or mandating controls to limit SaaS or cloud-based usage. It's about positively helping drive some of the traditional expertise and skills that IT has in areas like procurement, for instance, in SaaS selection processes, in how to craft an RFP, a request for proposal, and how to interact with various potential providers. IT organizations have done this for a long time, usually in conjunction with procurement, if you have a distinct procurement group within the organization. Business folks don't typically do this. They have a job to do. They may look to source capabilities. IT, and by extension procurement, can absolutely help in those areas, and that's a way to, I would say, provide value in the process as opposed to being viewed as a source of resistance. And the final point is to think about some of the core requirements, particularly identity management and access control, because security remains an issue, certainly, but it's not necessarily the obvious area of concern, which is around data security, where we're dealing with multi-tenanted environments, where we're dealing with potentially some data residency issues. Those are being addressed, in many cases have been addressed, and will continue to be addressed. What I'm talking about is really the organizational security in terms of access, in terms of identity management, and making sure that that's a consideration for the folks that will be accessing some of these capabilities. And it also impacts usability. We want to make it as easy as possible for our business stakeholders to have access to these systems. And in many cases, cloud-based systems help make that process easier. So with that, me thank you very much for the attention. I think we have some time for Q&A, so I'll turn it over to Leah for any questions.
We'll now begin the question and answer session. If you would like to ask a question, please press *1 on your telephone and wait for your name to be announced. To submit a question via the online, please type your question in the Q&A box located in the bottom left hand of your screen.
Okay, thanks, Leah. I'll just start with the questions on the web here. I got a few through the Q&A. The first one, Michael, is from Kim, and is wondering, in chart 14 in the survey, did the survey respondents answer why their perception is such? Example, in the Philippines, IT decision makers view cloud to be of a lower priority, but Australians or New Zealand decision makers place cloud on a higher and critical priority. Why?
Yeah, look, thanks for that, and thanks for the question, Kim. It's an excellent question. Let me share kind of my impressions, my interpretation of this data, and just for context, actually, I didn't show it, but I have results from 2012 as well, and it's surprising, or maybe not surprising, but the results are quite consistent. The percent across all markets in Asia who listed cloud or as a service as either critical or high has increased year on year, but the relative kind of ranking of countries has remained relatively consistent. So you see the mature IT markets, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Singapore at the top, and you see the real growth markets, particularly in ASEAN, at the bottom. To my view, based on the organizations we've spoken to, based on my interactions with organizations in Philippines as well as Indonesia and Malaysia, what I found is in those markets, software as a service and public cloud-based services in general tend to still be viewed slightly more tactical is probably the wrong word, but in a kind of limited in scope engagement. They tend to be more pragmatic buyers who make choices based on a kind of clearly defined business need, and therefore don't tend to, at this point anyway, look to formalize what we list in the question here, a comprehensive strategy for cloud. So this question isn't really saying or implying that adoption is lower in those countries per se. What we're saying is in those countries, they're not yet as far along in terms of IT and business working together to define a quote-unquote cloud strategy as such. That's consistent in those markets, but certainly in the Philippines as well. So it's not. It's more a reflection, I would say, of the relative influence and stature of IT within the organization, but it's not, I don't think, an indication of lower adoption. Hope that clarified.
Thanks, Michael. I got another one from Steve. With the cloud offering, what types are businesses looking at? Is it IaaS, so infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, or software as a service?
Yeah, look, another good question. I'd say it's in a couple of areas, and I actually displayed, and I'll put it back up. I actually displayed some of what we're seeing in terms of adoption here in terms of workloads. So definitely, in our view, it's kind of split across two areas: software as a service in one area and infrastructure as a service. Platform as a service, we're seeing significantly less adoption, and that's not surprising. The fact is, platform as a service at this point still mainly appeals to suppliers, to ISVs or other startups or folks who are looking to create an application, a SaaS-based application or a cloud-based application, and then sell it to other organizations. So businesses are the ones, and vendors, I should say, software vendors or cloud vendors, technically, are the ones that tend to be the early adopters and users of platform as a service. I'm not seeing a lot of corporate IT standardized on platform as a service, in most cases because they have a pretty well-defined software development, application development process with tools, and are far more geared still towards creating applications, developing them that get sourced to traditional on-premise infrastructure. Now, when it comes to SaaS, software as a service, and infrastructure as a service, they're very different in terms of the usage scenarios and use cases. For SaaS, we're definitely seeing collaboration, particularly email, as the number one area, and it shouldn't be surprising because that's the area, if we go back, that was the kind of earliest example in many cases of a cloud-based solution was Gmail or any other equivalent to that, and the comfort level with those, and more importantly, I'd say the obvious benefits is clear. It's very difficult, I'd say, for a small or medium-sized company to justify investing on-premise infrastructure, networking, and servers in order to host email, when by definition it needs to be networked and it needs to enable collaboration. Cloud-based solutions simply make more sense. On the infrastructure as a service side, it tends to be as basic as storage and backup, augmenting whatever existing storage on-premise that exists. And increasingly we're seeing it as a source of more strategic, well, let's call it backup, but really around disaster recovery, and viewing cloud as a way to implement a more strategic disaster recovery process or policy. And we're seeing that in markets where, unfortunately, natural disasters are a bit more top of mind. So we talked about Philippines earlier, Thailand, even Japan. Disaster recovery in the cloud is top of mind. And the other area is augmenting on-premise. So it's not, as I said, it's not an either-or solution. In many cases, particularly where we're dealing with systems of engagement, companies have their existing infrastructure but need to be able to respond to spikes in demand, spikes in usage, some of which will be planned and is easier to manage, but a lot of it that's not planned and is not easy to manage. So this idea of providing some type of bursting capability through the cloud for infrastructure as a service makes sense. Now, just to wrap it up, to come back to the topic at hand, for ERP, it's quite interesting because if you ask about ERP as a label, there's still a bit of resistance to the notion of ERP in the cloud, which is really based on, in our view, incorrect assumptions. It's based on some maybe uncertainty and doubt, and I suppose we could add fear to that as well, around the potential perceived risks of having your core systems of record in the cloud. Those are quickly getting overcome by the obvious benefits, and what we're finding is many of those concerns are misguided, if not ill-founded entirely. To get around that and to avoid the kind of knee-jerk reaction that ERP as a label kind of has, that's why we asked about industry-specific solutions and about horizontal solutions as a way to gauge the adoption without kind of introducing the bias that ERP as a term might engender. And you can see there, they're significant, the usage, and they're growing. So the variation between the top use case collaboration versus the bottom one on this, which would be horizontal solutions, is not massive. I hope that helps.
Thank you. I've got another one. We probably have time for 2-3 more questions. This is from James. Which process is leading the conversion to SaaS? Is it sales, HR, or procure to pay? What is the trend?
Oh, that's a great question. I suppose I'll give you the easy answer, but the real answer, which is I suppose the quote unquote the analyst answer, is it depends. It depends on the organization. It depends on a lot of factors, external factors on their market, but also a lot of internal factors. Really how much foresight the IT group has and how much they have legitimately kind of internalized their role for provisioning technology-enabled or IT-enabled capabilities versus simply managing infrastructure. But the clear answer, certainly in terms of who's been driving software as a service broadly, is it's coming from sales. And that's particularly true in Asia Pacific only because of the obvious strength and kind of natural perceived link between traditional CRM, not traditional, but CRM, customer relationship management type solutions, and software as a service. There is a clear link there. And so that tended to be the starting point for many SaaS engagements, many SaaS investments. And it's expanded from there along the reasons I said, which is at some point those customer-facing sales enablement capabilities or service enablement capabilities, if that was the case, or even the marketing capabilities, they need to link back to what were traditional internal systems, internal ERP systems that may, frankly, not be up to the task. They may be too brittle to be modified. They may be too old or too poorly maintained to really be extensible or to be integratable or to allow for any of the key capabilities to be exposed in an effective way to some of these systems. So what we've seen is a kind of shift and an expansion of the views of organizations, and this is where the increased demand for ERP in particular has come in. So we certainly see it in areas like HR and even in procure to pay in some instances, but definitely sales and CRM in particular, and the various flavors of CRM was to a large extent the driving force, certainly in Asia.
Thank you. I just want to check with Leah if there are any questions on the phone.
There are no further questions. Please continue.
Okay, wonderful. I'd say we have time for one more question. There's another one from Steve. Did the research target specific verticals or have noticed verticals showing more interest in the cloud than others?
Yeah, look, the truth is the beauty of the studies that I shared, if you notice, the sample size was pretty significant. We're talking, a minimum of 1,000 respondents. So the good news is that allowed us to slice and dice by vertical, to look at verticals, in some cases within specific countries, but certainly across the region as a whole to look for variations. And the short answer is actually there's far less variation by vertical than you'd expect. The best example right now is banking, financial services. There's a commonly held belief, and it's actually incorrect belief, that banks are resisting the adoption of cloud, and banks will be laggards because of concerns over customer data, because of tight restrictions and regulations from the various governing bodies. That's actually not true. Banks are, while I wouldn't necessarily call them early adopters, they are absolutely what we call fast followers, and that's happening across all kinds of workloads within banks. In other industries, it's interesting. It tends to follow. The more things change, the more they stay the same, I suppose. Folks in industries that have traditionally lagged in IT investment, so I would say folks in necessarily things like retail, maybe in family-owned manufacturing organizations, they tend to continue to lag. So in this case, SaaS-based solutions are kind of not too different from more traditional on-premise. We expect that to change, or expect the lag to go down, but it's based on education. the more these folks understand and are able to weigh the relative pros and cons, the perceived risks against the clear benefits, I think you'll see the gaps start to decrease because the issues of upfront capital expenditures really don't apply or apply far, far less in the SaaS world.
Thank you. Last question from Yusuf. Is cloud beneficial only for SMEs? From your experience, what company size do generally adapt cloud-based solutions?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. It's interesting. If you look at adoption trends, and this is true globally, the primary adopters of cloud are not small and mid-sized organizations. They are large enterprises. The large enterprises are spending more, investing more time, resources, and adopting more right now across pretty much all cloud workloads. Having said that, I think the benefits to small and mid-sized organizations, particularly in growth markets where there are limited resources, are obvious, are actually, I think, a bit more obvious as a way to get around some of the traditional resource constraints that those types of organizations are dealing with. But if you look at, let's look at a multinational as an example. One of my colleagues actually recently published some reports and actually did a webinar on this very topic. It's the notion of two-tier ERP implementations, where let's say it's a European-based multinational. Let's say they have a large ERP instance, SAP. They're running in their home office in Germany or France or England or wherever it is. That doesn't necessarily mean that they can deploy that same solution, the same approach in all of their regions, in all of their local operations. They just don't have the resources to do it. They don't have the IT skills to do it. They don't have the local infrastructure to do it. So we're seeing that be a big driver of cloud-based ERP, and that driving investments, and that ends up being very much the hybrid story that I mentioned earlier. So the adoption is across the board. I think the demand drivers vary between large enterprises and small and mid-sized organizations, but we absolutely expect to see that adoption increase across the board.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you, Michael, for being our guest speaker today. And thank you, everyone, for your time and attending the webinar. That concludes the NetSuite Asia Pacific webinar series for today. Thank you.